Just want to welcome everyone to the webinar and introduce the three of us. So my name is Nikhil Gower. I'm the Director of Strategic Projects and a Research Analyst at Spend Matters. And just so you know, we are a research firm that goes really deep on the procurement, supply chain, and finance markets. And I especially cover the intake and orchestration market very extensively, which is why I'm here, of course. But I also want to introduce Kevin and Matt here. I'll start with Kevin Stacy. He is the head of procurement at Cockroach Labs, and Kevin is an accomplished sourcing and operations leader with extensive client and supplier side experience in procurement and finance. And prior to joining Cockroach Labs, Kevin was a senior procurement manager with UiPath and a category manager at TD Ameritrade. So really looking forward to hearing insights from Kevin later on about his experience with orchestration and with Tonkean. I would also like to introduce Matt Aronson. Matt is the Senior Director of Product Marketing at Tonkean. And prior to this role, he was the Senior Director of Product Marketing at Simpler, a Senior Director of Marketing at Atrius, and the Director of Product Marketing at Demandbase. So the three of us have all actually, if you don't mind going to the next slide, Matt, the three of us have been collaborating over the last 2 months on an ebook that is now available. And it just kind of goes over the journey that Kevin and his team at Cockroach Labs have taken over the last several months with onboarding orchestration and the tangible results that they've already seen from it. So this webinar is actually sort of derived from the ebook. And we're talking about some similar insights here, but just want to make it clear that it's now available, and it's free, and we're really interested in everyone reading it and giving us feedback because I think it was a really cool collaboration, especially in this space, because orchestration is so new, and getting more stories about actual results out there is something that is not really being done yet. So would really implore you all to check that out. So just to start out here, if we go to the next slide, to sort of set the stage, I just want to give a quick little overview of what we mean when we talk about some terms today, particularly intake and orchestration. So to start out here, intake, right? I mean, the concept of it is not new. We're talking basically about the initial capturing of demand and routing of a request by software. So that has existed for a long time. That's not new. But what's new about it is the way that it's being productized and featured so heavily by software providers, and especially in procurement. So in the past, you might have had several different tools that requests are starting from, and then going from there, they might end up in different tools, and it might be difficult to know exactly where something is because you don't know where it started. But now that's a problem of the past with intake and orchestration, because you don't have to have everything from the intake tool. You could use Slack or Teams or other apps. Tonkean, for example, supports that. But you still could, if you want to, start everything from the same place and have everything centralized. So centralization is really the main problem that is being solved here, because the interface is easier to use because it's typically no code, typically very focused on the user, with modern features like drag and drop and the use of AI and natural language. So it's really focused on minimizing the amount of time needed for a request to get kicked off. And that centralization is really important because now people essentially can know exactly where something is and what needs to be done to complete it. So if you go to the next slide for orchestration, that is sort of the next step after intake. And it kind of overlaps a bit with what I was just talking about, because with intake, the request is being made and routed to the right place. But with orchestration, the request that has already been made is now being completed, whether in the solution that the intake happened or in an external tool or tools like other source to pay tools or HR, IT, wherever people work already, essentially. So the key to note here is that orchestration is about taking requests that have been made from the intake and allowing users to execute steps to complete those processes without necessarily having to leave the solution, right? Because many tools these days offer both intake and orchestration in the same, general package, such as Tonkean, for example. So you don't have to use separate tools for these processes. The only way that there's an exception to this is if you use Slack or Teams or even Jira, something like that, to manage requests. But that's a case-by-case basis if you want to have that, because the integration supported. But the main thing to note beyond what I've already said for this slide is that orchestration is really important to have a strong integration framework, because Orchestration is about making sure everything is communicating and everything is sort of up to date on the same page, and users have a single source of truth to access where a request is in the process. So just speaking overall here, orchestration is about what happens after the request, and intake is about the request itself. So if you go to the next slide here, which is my last one before I'll turn it over, this market has really taken off in the last few years. There are a lot of different reasons for that, and I think the biggest one is usability. There's been maybe not a major problem, but an issue with some legacy source to pay providers that are not offering software that is particularly easy to use, in part because if you want to make any changes, you have to contact an IT department or a services team to make changes for you. But now with modern intake and orchestration, you can, in most cases, make changes yourself through a much easier to use interface. And this also encourages end user adoption more quickly because you don't need to have training sessions to onboard users. Users just log into the application for the first time, and it's very intuitive because of how modern these platforms are and how easy they are to use. And that also extends to implementation, of course, because by nature, a system that is easier to use typically implements faster, and that is the case with intake and orchestration relative to legacy, source to pay, and other procurement tech. So those are the key points beyond just, in general, like I mentioned on the last slide, with integrations being so important, having really complex tech landscapes, like, dozens of ERPs and different source to pay tools and other tech, that's no longer a deterrent because these integration frameworks are typically so strong that the orchestration platform can support all of these tools, even if, in the past it would have been difficult to get them to all communicate with each other. So that's just sort of a general overview of the rise of this market. And now I'd like to turn it over to Matt to add some more context.
Thank you, Nikhil, and excited to be here with this group today. Appreciate your support on Spend Matters, as well as Kevin and Cockroach. I think we have a great story to tell here today about their adoption journey. Many of you are already familiar with Tonkean, but for those who are encountering us for the first time, a little bit of background. So Tonkean's mission is to unlock human potential by transforming how organizations leverage smart technology, along with how we as humans experience it. And experience, as you will see here today, is a really key word. Tonkean's intake and orchestration platform is designed to help shared service teams, especially procurement teams and legal teams, build processes that people will actually follow so that they can drive adoption, compliance, and efficiency. As you can see on this slide, Tonkean is being actively used at scale by a pretty incredible roster of customers, including, of course, Cockroach Labs, whom you will hear from today. But I want to dig in a little bit on the why. Why did Tonkean, which really sort of started out in 2015 as a no-code development platform, why did we find along the way that procurement teams and their needs and priorities align really well to a specific set of problems that Tonkean can help solve? Well, when only 1 in 10 chief procurement officers believe that their software provides significant value, there's definitely something amiss, right, beneath the surface. And the survey cited here traces the problem back to 2 key issues, right? First, an adoption shortfall, with a mere 14% of procurement teams reporting broad usage of their tools among requesters and stakeholders. Second, a disconnect between and among applications, processes, and the people who depend upon them. And Nikhil was alluding to this problem before, right? There's been an absolute proliferation in tools and applications and data sources that support procurement teams. And while every component might do a particular thing really well, virtually no processes are run out of a single application when you consider the sort of end-to-end workflows and all the people who touch it. So some big downstream problems that flow from these 2 root causes as well, right? Higher rogue spend, you're going to have missed savings opportunity, lower than ideal spend under management, slower cycle times, right, as things sort of sit in the gaps and chasms between applications, between people, and need that nudge along. And finally, wasted procurement team bandwidth as your um, uh, high expertise and well compensated procurement folks find themselves manually supporting their requesters and doing their intake and capturing the information and data and inputs that they need to do their job when they could otherwise be doing higher value work. So how do you solve for all this? Well, broadly, this is why intake and orchestration as a technology category has been so ascendant, as I thought Nikhil laid out pretty well there. Tonkean's Procurement Works solution integrates directly with your procure to pay platform and every other key application in your technology stack, addressing all of those concerns and more. So at the heart of Procurement Works lie two essential elements. First is frictionless intake experiences, offering a guided, personalized journey that meets employees in their preferred communications channels, anticipates and predicts what they need, walks them step by step through their requests, and grants them complete visibility into the process, thus creating a dynamic where employees will readily and enthusiastically adopt your intended intake channels. And second, an orchestration engine that unifies workflows that cut across multiple applications and people and data sources, adhering to your policies and processes as laid out in Tonkean's no-code interface. Procurement Works arrives out of the box with workflows for a bunch of core use cases, and you can see some of those on the right here. But thanks to Tonkean's no-code environment, you can adapt these pre-built workflows to your unique requirements without any coding necessary. And you can construct entirely new workflows from scratch without relying on IT support. Now, in February, Tonkean unveiled agentic orchestration, which we define as the enterprise-ready approach to AI automation, wherein autonomous agents work alongside employees to coordinate workflows, execute tasks, and drive outcomes, all while following configurable policies and guardrails. And Tonkean's agentic orchestration fuses autonomous AI with deterministic orchestration. So the autonomous AI component leverages large language models to understand user intent, deploy the right specialized agents for individual tasks, coordinate processes across those agents, and engage in plain language conversations with users. While meanwhile, right, the deterministic modules follow your rules to the letter. So ensuring your processes and policies are enforced to a T. And this deterministic orchestration component is essentially the infrastructure that big organizations need to deploy AI in a way that's both effective and sufficiently buttoned up, so to speak, right? And we can, we're happy to talk more about that at a later date. Moving on here, orchestrating across the enterprise tech stack, Tonkean ties your procure to pay or source to pay platform into the broader enterprise technology ecosystem using a robust library of plug and play connectors. Critically, these integrations are built and maintained in-house by Tonkean. We do not white label a third-party workflow or iPaaS vendor or platform. And as far as I know, Tonkean is alone in our intake and orchestration category, and being able to say that we have direct control over how these integrations function, which allows us to better support enterprise complexity, right? So Nikhil mentioned you have a dozen ERPs, Tonkean can support that, right? You have complex data mapping, including custom fields, Tonkean can support that. You maintain a truly stateful architecture designed for enterprise scale complexity. Beyond providing requesters with one intake, one experience layer for procurement teams and partner functions like legal and IT, everyone can keep using their own preferred systems while still collaborating or being centralized into a single orchestrated environment, right? So to sort of put a bow on what is Tonkean and what is Procurement Works before I hand it over to Kevin to talk about Cockroach Labs and their adoption of Procurement Works. Just want to look at how these capabilities come together to create this genuinely intelligent orchestration layer for procurement, and it's really grounded in three pillars, right? So enterprise readiness, a fully no-code platform that puts you in control with drag and drop tools for designing workflows and automations and user-centric intake experiences as well, right? Full detailed audit logs, fine-grained access permissions that strike the right balance between security and flexibility. Second, proactive and deeply interoperable. So more than 200 built-in connectors, and you can go to tonkean.com/library and browse all of them right now. In fact, my more than 200 may in fact be out of date. I wonder if we're pushing more than 250 at this point. The stateful architecture I mentioned before, designed to make workflows flow seamlessly across systems and continuously monitor and preserve data integrity. And then finally, human centricity, and we mean this in a very multidimensional way. So it's both this unwavering emphasis on intuitive, frictionless experiences that encourage and invite adoption and compliance, and this commitment to keeping a human in the loop at critical moments in any process, including processes that heavily draw on artificial intelligence. So with that, I want to hand it over to Kevin Stacy from Cockroach Labs. Kevin, take it away.
Thanks, Matt. Sorry. Excuse me. Nice to meet everyone digitally. So Cockroach Labs, obviously we've been partnering with Tonkean now. Cockroach Labs is a distributed SQL database. I won't go into the great details of that, but our product obviously focuses on scalability, resilience, and availability. So it was a great partnership with Tonkean because a lot of at the core of what we do is what we were looking for in a product to help us design orchestration and intake. So we're based in the US, but obviously have operations globally, over 500 folks, and obviously supporting a lot of the biggest enterprises around the globe that you probably interact with on a daily basis. Excuse me. I've been at the company a little over 3 years, and we, like I said, have been partnering with Tonkean now since about middle of last year, and obviously excited to share kind of where we're at and what we've been able to deploy. So before Tonkean, and I'll try to be brief here, but I think Cockroach is in a mid-market state, and as companies grow and scale, it's exciting, it's fun, it's obviously a lot of work, but ultimately there's a lot of change that happens, and a lot of that obviously surrounds systems and processes. A lot of times there isn't systems and processes in place when the company's smaller and more nimble. Obviously, there's a little tighter control around who's going out, engaging with suppliers. Folks obviously kind of obviously all know each other and all interact on a daily basis. As the company grows and scales, you start to go get more mature systems that allow you to scale to that enterprise size. But what lacks there is that movement from that small company where everybody kind of knows the process and it's communicated through kind of word of mouth and it's kind of known, to maybe you don't interact with folks as regularly, right? Procurement might not deal with you on a daily basis like they did when you were a smaller place. So that became the problem for us. It was getting too complex and there was too much confusion around what needed to be done. And, folks traditionally want to do the right thing. It was just, how do they do that without having to interact with someone on a daily basis? So we turned to obviously orchestration and intake to obviously help solve and mitigate some of the challenges we were facing. So in terms of our needs, I talked about scalability as one of our core tenets, and obviously that was a huge decision factor for us when we were looking at orchestration tools. So integrations was a huge component. In a mid-market space, you typically don't have that overarching ability to just say, here's the tools we're using now, and different departments all kind of fall into line. We wanted to be able to go work in the places, or obviously meet in the places where other departments were working. So allowing our legal team to continue to operate in their legal specific tool, but obviously still having that experience for that end user be a great experience to where they don't even know potentially that that's happening in the background. They just have this really fantastic experience when they're submitting their requests within Tonkean. Simplicity and accessibility, obviously huge components. Simplicity being paramount because that's at the core what we were trying to solve was simplifying the process for the general user who may not go out and be a power buyer, right? They're not buying on a daily basis. Maybe they're buying something once a month or once a quarter. For them to have that same experience and have a uniform process for the back end folks, understanding that if somebody doesn't know the process versus they're a power user, no matter what, your legal, your risk teams, et cetera, are all getting the information they need to do their respective jobs. And it's happening in a standardized way. Obviously, orchestration, a huge component of it, can support the different workflows across the different teams, data sources, tools, different ways of operating. So contract management, again, we moving, and growing, we didn't necessarily have a CLM in place. So something that could help us ultimately collect, store, obviously sort the metadata around the contracts, have the ability to pull those contracts easily. But again, that being a starting point, and then Tonkean still allowing us when, one day, God willing, we mature into, we go out and buy a full boat CLM tool, we'd ultimately be able to just transition our workflows into that and not have to rip everything up and start anew. And then obviously scalability, which I just touched on, is the ability for, as tools come and go, maybe tools get added into the process, be able to drop those into our existing workflows versus, again, having to start everything brand new and obviously then retrain folks and have folks get comfortable with the process. So obviously, the results have been great so far. Prior to this, folks were going in and creating purchase orders within our source to pay tool. There was all the different tickets they were submitting in different systems. Now that's all happening automatically. We've obviously tied in the Tonkean workflow into our source to pay solution. So when folks, get the different approvals that are required to get a purchase order, that purchase order and those approvals are automatically pushing over from Tonkean into our source to pay. Again, reducing the manual effort for the procurement folks because the work's been done on the front end, and now obviously we're trying to reduce our involvement on those manual processes. And then, as regardless of the department, folks can access Tonkean where, we're going where they already work, right? I mentioned earlier, our legal team's using a tool called LawView. Our compliance team's using Jira. We had previously, conversations were happening on Slack to get approvals for things, maybe from the finance team. So it creates it more uniformly to be able to obviously collect that information, but still allow folks to operate where they want. With the exception of Slack, we've standardized that within Tonkean to get a bit more audit proof tracking. And like I mentioned, Tonkean automatically moves the approval chains through, and the parallel approvals happening was a huge component. So, like I said, most folks want to do the right thing. They just want to get what they're trying to buy, the software, the professional service, whatever. So previously, folks would be maybe submitting a ticket to legal, and legal might raise, "Hey, we're sharing some information. Did you submit this to compliance?" And they say, "Oh no, shoot, I forgot." And that obviously is adding time. But with the logic that is able to be built within Tonkean, you're able to then trigger automatically based on some simple questions. Hey, compliance should be reviewing this because we're sharing potential information there. So it's happening in parallel. Compliance, legal, risk, whomever is all happening at the same time, shortening that cycle time, which is obviously a huge win for the end user and the company as a whole. Okay. I think I've touched on this. Before this, we were pretty manual in terms of our operations. We were using Coupa, so we did have the tracking of the managerial approvals for obviously the spend, and that was great. But we weren't necessarily having a central source to ask questions, to obviously give procurements approval. We're doing, again, Slack, email, etc., different communication channels. Again, Tonkean's really helped us centralize all this and allow us to be more proactive rather than reactive. So when something's raised now, we're getting that alert immediately. Whereas previously, maybe it was we were getting clued in from the legal department, or maybe it was our business partner reaching us saying, oh, I forgot to mention this. We want to go renew this contract. Now, everybody's getting that information as it's being entered. So you're taking that one entry point from your end user or your business partner. And then now all the respective parties are getting alerted at the same time. So it allows procurement to be more proactive, which is a huge component for us, obviously, as we manage our spend, to not just be a checkbox, but to be more of a proactive partner to the business and help them, manage the business in an appropriate way, not just from a pure cost savings perspective, but just from a general business strategy perspective as we obviously grow and scale and look at new and obviously growing partners. Like I mentioned, we've I don't want to say automated, but we've obviously put within the workflows all the different things that were happening in those different sources. So finance approvals were happening over Slack and email. Legal review was happening in a legal system. Compliance was happening in Jira. Procurement was happening in conversations, email, Slack. It's all now happening in one location, and it allows the end user to be able to see the progress so that they know that things are in the works, and it's not just a constant barrage of, hey, where's this at? Can we sign this today? What's going on? We're getting pressure. So, and finally, another thing too is, it allows kind of that process to be more uniform, in that before folks were potentially requesting NDAs, they might not. Now we're able to allow folks to request certain things that maybe they had to go to a different system from the Tonkean front end. So even though we're just effectively pushing to another tool, it allows folks to go to a single source to be able to request these things. But like I've mentioned, I think numerous times, it allows kind of our general business partners to operate where their preferred way of operating is. I think, the results, you'll see the 83% have been fantastic. I think, it's really taken down the time to enter the request from probably about 30 minutes when all the different various tickets and conversations were happening, potentially even more in the past, to now, it takes 5 minutes at the most. I've had numerous folks say when we've kind of walked them through the process saying like, oh, I could have figured this out myself. This is so easy, which I think is a compliment and a testament to how great the product is. It's just simplified the experience, and it's made it so much easier for folks to get what they need. And I think one of the benefits that is probably not mentioned as frequently, but I think has been probably one of the biggest wins for us, is our overall partnership with other, departments that we consider peers, our legal teams, our risk teams, et cetera. They feel that, we're, making sure that they're involved, which I think is obviously valued. And there's other parts where maybe, certain folks may not have gotten requests previously, right? And they didn't know that we engaged a certain vendor. And now we've obviously been able to uncover certain, relationships, et cetera, that exist. So those respective teams are aware of it and can speak to it, and they feel that they're also able to be proactive, and it obviously helps them with their own department leadership, et cetera. So it's been a huge win with other departments that obviously are part of the buying process beyond just procurement, where, we're putting this in place. Go to the next slide.
So as we get into the demo, everyone should have seen the Q&A box pop up in their webinar view here. Please do feel free to pop questions into that box or into the chat. And time permitting, at the end of the session here, we can try to address as many as we can. For now, I'm going to, sorry to interrupt you, Kevin, because Kevin is going to go into our demo. And just a sort of programming note on the demo here. This is a pre-recorded demo video that Kevin's going to speak over for the sake of being able to show a real production Tonkean environment that Cockroach is using, while also protecting sensitive data in Cockroach's system. We opted to do it this way, but of course, if you're interested in seeing another live demo going deep and probing us on it, we're happy to set up a meeting to show you more. So Kevin, are you ready to take it away here?
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously this is just going to be walking through, one brand new intake. As Matt and the team have mentioned, there's obviously a bunch of pre-built workflows that can be, deployed / customized. So this is just one, obviously the possibilities are endless. And that was, again, a huge consideration as we were we were choosing Tonkean. So quickly, obviously, you have your kind of general intake box. The AI here, I think, is a great component where you might have folks that are not power buyers and don't really know what to do. So beyond just doing a new purchase request, you can just ask an open-ended question, and the AI will understand your environment, right? It's a closed environment, but it will pull policies, any sort of documents that you've loaded. You're signing anything that you've loaded, you're buying policy. In this case, we asked the question, I just need to buy a new software. It's going to say, sure, I can help you with that. Here's your new purchase request. Again, this information will all be fairly vague or generic, but we're trying to use some level of realism. But so as you go into the actual intake here, there's different options. The first being new purchase, which is the kind of the full boat purchase, right? So that's going to bring brand new vendor, need to do the full review of their kind of services. We're renewing an existing vendor, amending an existing contract mid-term, and then your general catch-all of I need assistance. I'm not really sure what I need. Again, all different things that can be customized as you work with the Tonkean team to deploy. In this case, we'll obviously do a new purchase. Right below that, you have the different relevant categories, bigger buckets, right? Software, marketing, services, etc. This obviously is where you're able to then start adjusting the funnel and the required things. So maybe for office expenses, your legal team's like, don't ever send me an agreement for that. You can have it to where that's not obviously triggering their team versus obviously software, they're likely going to want to review. So it allows you to obviously customize the experience and make sure that people are going down the right path, and also minimize the noise for your various partners. Again, general questions here, the estimated cost. A great one we love, when do you need this by? Because everything can be a fire drill for procurement. So it allows us to plan our own bandwidth and obviously the time that we can go negotiate and work with their partners. So in this case, it'll be April 30th. As you come onto the next screen, a lot of this will be tying in for us into Coupa, so our source to pay solution. So this is obviously I'm the requester. If you wanted to change, maybe it's a EA or a chief of staff that's doing on behalf of someone else, you can change the requester. Just like in Coupa or obviously a lot of other source to pay solutions, you can add watchers or kind of folks that are looped into it. This is obviously great from just maybe you want to let the chief of staff know that you're putting this in because it's a huge component for your team. Again, some of this country of purchase, this is all just tying into Coupa, direct feed in. So when we update this in Coupa, obviously we're going to pull that information into Tonkean. Again, nothing crazy here. Again, NICE has the currencies. So maybe it's hitting our main US entity, but we're buying a euro purchase because it's a trade show in Europe, whatever it might be. Again, in this case, we're just going to use our standard USD. Again, offices for us for ship to address, pulling back into Coupa. This will all be used in the future when the system automatically generates a purchase order upon getting all the approvals. Here, I feel like I'm being repetitive, but pulling from Coupa, it's just pulling our master supplier list. So as suppliers are created in Coupa or information's updated within Coupa, it will trigger over to Tonkean. We're going to hide this here. We'll pick a fairly non-controversial vendor of Apple because a lot of folks are obviously working with them. If you did want to, maybe this is a brand new purchase like I showed, and we don't have them set up, you can just type plus new vendor is how we have it set up. And that will trigger the new supplier request form that we have in Coupa that will push out for folks to join the Coupa supplier portal. Just the standard basic information that we're asking in Coupa, but it's in this one source within your standard intake workflow within Tonkean, so folks don't have to go over to Coupa to do that. Again, meeting them where they are and what they know and what they use. But for this case, obviously not to trigger something going over to Apple, we'll just use Apple for this. Again, I mentioned the ability to trigger out different systems. Here's where we request, do you need an NDA? So if you said, yes, I do need an NDA, it will pop up the questions that our legal team needs to be able to send out our standard MNDA. If you say, no, we already have one, or we don't need an NDA, you would do that. Apple's obviously already a supplier. Here, here's their AR email address because it's pulling from Coupa, which has our supplier information. But if it wasn't a brand new supplier, it would be blank, and we would send the NDA out to the supplier. Which again, just a great feature from a simplicity standpoint, and just an ease of use for the general user. All right, and now we're going into the actual meat and potatoes of the purchase order itself that will be generated in the future. So currency pulling from what we answered earlier. So that's you just remind you what it is. This can all be customized. For us, we have the kind of critical things, which is what type of engagement is it? So is it a time and materials or a fixed price? So when you click over to time and materials, it's going to show your quantity. For this case, we'll just use fixed price just to keep it simple. Hide price is something that we're pulling direct from Coupa as well. We use this for just generating blanket POs for certain suppliers. Um, we use this in a lot of instances with certain departments. So it's something that we wanted to have visible to folks in Tonkean. Again, can all be customized, whatever's important to you and your organization. And now you're just in the line item entry like you would be doing in your source to pay solution. So for this case, just a general description of the line item. So we'll just make up security software that I did when we created this demo. Um, Price, again, tying back, it shows up top that it's USD. Start and end dates, again, big for us, just to be able to understand the engagement date and also planning for renewals in the future. So in this case, we said we needed it by April 30th, so it's a May 1st start date. And we'll just pick software. This is pulling from Coupa. This is just pulling from our expense types in Coupa or commodities. If you needed to add obviously multiple lines, maybe there's some implementation services, etc. You can add multiple lines just like you would in Coupa, and it would generate that PO. At the bottom there, it's going to show your totals. That'll sum in total of your line items. Again, pulling back to your managerial approval structure. So if it's over a certain amount, maybe it triggers your CFO, right? Tonkean allows you to do that, where you're able to customize your approvals and notification triggers. Here, this section now, business justification, was a huge win for us too, because a lot of the questions that we're asking were asked across numerous sources. So pretty much every team was asking, like, what are we buying and why are we buying it, right? So we're able to ask that question once and then push that response to the legal ticket, to the risk and compliance ticket, obviously to finance and procurement. So ask the question once. It may seem small, but the fact that folks aren't having to repeat themselves numerous times just again reduces the time for entry and just reduces the frustration of like, I've answered this 5 times. Under business justification, I think we showed a great use case here is the inline use of AI. In this case, it knows what you've already entered in your ticket. It knows your system, your closed environment of any policies, etc. So you can ask it, help me fill out a business justification for a new laptop security. It's going to be able to access what's in your environment. It's not necessarily an open structure, which is great because it knows, hey, they've loaded procurement policy, right? Maybe there's rules and around purchasing hardware, and over certain amounts it requires certain approvals, whatever it might be. It will give you this. We're using a very simple example here. Help me write the reason why I need this based on what I've given. Again, it's not just a one-time thing. You could say, hey, I can make this a little more simple. Maybe my legal and compliance team don't really like long-winded answers, and it will do that. Right below, you'll see need more help, talk to an expert. That touches then into the collaboration feature, which I think we'll talk about in a second in the demo. But in this instance, to say, hey, if this concise answer looks great, I can then drop this answer and help me write this answer. Again, some questions that we've kind of created: commercial negotiations, procurement handled it, and they did a great job. This again, just helping us understand what were we involved as a team, or did you self-negotiate this? Replacement timeline was a big one. Taking the information of how long would it take to actually replace a vendor. Getting a 30 or 60-day renewal notice is great, but if you're replacing a major piece of software that's going to take 6, 9, 12 months, doesn't really do much good for the procurement or the different teams to be able to say, we can replace this next year. So this is all information we're collecting to help with the renewal triggers within Tonkean, to be able to be alerted, hey, if you want to replace Apple, you need to do this now, not in 3-4 months. Now is when we're going to go into, again, completely customizable stuff that we have from our legal and compliance folks. Nothing terribly consequential or controversial here, but answer kind of what's the purpose of this system, how it will be used. Again, I'm just going to put something in here. There we go. And then below, now we'll talk about some of the ability to use inline collaboration. So rather than just a general kind of catch-all comments or bucket or page, the collaboration function is great because it'll actually tie back to the question you're actually responding or replying to. And that's where I talked about if you in the AI say I need more help, it'll then tag in the collaboration. So maybe I just want to alert the compliance team that this is part of an annual goal. The compliance team would then be directed specifically to this question, and maybe they're going to give me a comment back that like, hey, great, we've noted it on the tracking for annual goals this year, or whatever it might be. But just a way to where people don't have to go search out in a process that does have a couple of different screens to find that very specific question that your comments related to. Again, just a URL for the teams. Again, questions that they've asked. We'll skip the rest because obviously then it starts to get into very specific things. But again, all very specific questions that your team can customize. Supporting docs here, same thing. You have the ability to set up e-signature connection. So we use DocuSign. You can use many other ones. But so do you need to sign an agreement? You can have it triggered to where it'll automatically then, when you go create the DocuSign envelope, once it's fully executed, it'll pull that back into Tonkean, store it on whatever backend CLM or drive you're using. If you say no, it just won't require that. And then right below that are supporting documents. So not the document that you would need to get signed, but if it's the contract proposal, if it's the SOC 2 report, any specific document that's required for just general review by the team. And that's it. Again, fairly straightforward. I think the great thing here is now what it's going to do is it's going to show you everything that's going to happen. So when the requester puts in this ticket, the first thing they're going to see is what's going to happen next. And they're immediately going to see, okay, great, I've submitted it, right? The first review that happens, right, you'll see there is our FP&A team, right? We've structured it to where if we don't have the money for it, let's not waste other folks' time at this point, right? So once the FP&A team approves, then it's going to waterfall trigger all the different reviews, right? So your legal, your compliance, your procurement, all those reviews can happen. And then obviously, as you go in here, it'll just be all the information that you entered in your intake. So really, really straightforward. I think the beauty is the simplicity of it here. And I think the fact that, it allows users to kind of have that like digital handhold through the process, but then still have the ability to reach out via the collaboration, via different kind of ask for help as an option. It allows kind of the best of both worlds. I think a lot of folks want to be able to just do it themselves, but they want the ability to then reach out and say like, hey, I have a question, or hey, I need help with this. So that's where, kind of we wanted to show you, at least on what we've done so far. Obviously, plenty more that we've deployed, but I'll stop ranting and raving about everything we've done and let Matt jump back in and obviously maybe note anything I missed around that way.
No, I thought that was quite comprehensive. Thank you, Kevin. Now I'm trying to advance our slide here. Okay, so we're at the Q&A portion of our session here with about 15 minutes left. Nikhil is going to sort of moderate for us here. Nikhil? Oh. Do we have Nikhil? Nikhil, are you frozen? Wait, maybe we can hear you.
Joys of modern technology.
Here we go. We have you back, Nikhil. We can hear you again.
Okay, sorry. I was going to say before the Q&A, one thing I found really interesting about that and this market is that it's not just a demo environment, right? That's how Kevin's company is actually using the tool. And everything there is so configurable, right? Like every process that happened, every question that was asked is extremely configurable for each company. And that's where so much of the value comes into from this kind of software. So I just want to point that out because he was showing all the processes and, it's very interesting to watch, but it's also, if you're watching as a practitioner, if you do things a little differently, obviously that could be supported too. So I just want to point that out. But the first question I'll ask then will be for Kevin. And I want to ask, since adopting Tonkean, obviously your team has automated a lot of your tasks that you were doing manually in the past. So I just want to ask, what's the impact of that eliminating that manual work in terms of your team's performance, capacity, and just overall driving business value?
I mean, I think the first thing is just general satisfaction of your own team, right? I think you're able to actually do what you enjoy doing, which is, helping your partners, find the right, vendors, helping obviously negotiate agreements, et cetera, versus, manually pushing through PO generations and things like that that are just transactional work. So getting out of the way of that transactional work and be able to focus on your core of your job that you actually enjoy doing, I think is a huge component of it. Um, I think, also centralizing a lot of that information is just allowed for less manual pulling of reporting. I think before you would get requests, hey, can you pull information around this or pull some information around how much we saved on software negotiate. All that information is just available because you're tracking it as it occurs. So I think the reduction in manual effort and kind of fire drill requests has been a huge component. Being able to just find a contract, right? Simply, hey, where's the agreement for this? We're going through our annual audit and they want find these 20 samples, right? Well, I can just go into the recs and I can just pull those agreements down. If my legal team needs to look at every agreement from Apple in our instance, right? They can just go to the folder for Apple obviously on the back end and just look at every agreement we've ever done with Apple. So it allows your own team to not be a bottleneck and just obviously allow the information where where you've permission to be able to be accessed by the necessary folks.
Of course, yeah, that makes sense. And another thing you mentioned that I liked was about the infrequent user, right? And how Tonkean being easy to use is really helpful for the infrequent user. And kind of going on a similar note to that, talking about other departments, non-procurement departments, right? Like, I guess the question more is departments like legal and compliance, to be specific. You've talked about in the case study that we wrote, you talked about your relationship with those departments actually improving. So
Yeah.
I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more about that. Why has it improved, and what are the benefits of that for the company overall?
Yeah, I think, I'll touch on some, obviously, a couple points. I think with the general user point, I think it's I don't want to say it's easy, but when you're smaller, it's pretty tight knit, and you obviously have a small group of folks that are going out and spending, and dealing with vendors and managing those relationships. But as you grow and scale, like, it's just not possible to keep it as close, right? You can't just have one or two people per department controlling the spend, right? Eventually, it's going to decentralize, and you need to have a solution that allows that to happen without having to literally be a hand-holding individual to each of those folks, right? So this obviously solution allows you to do that. And then I think from the aspect of kind of our partners within the organization, the relationships improvement, not that we necessarily had poor relations, but I think we've helped them uncover areas where maybe they didn't have visibility into certain things. And conversely, we've been able to, obviously see things that we weren't able to previously see. So the compliance team might not been, had a request created, right, to review a piece of software. And they might say, I didn't even know we were working with this vendor, right? But now when they're going to have the renewal entered, that's getting triggered. And they can at least now say, okay, we know that this vendor's in our tech stack. So let's make sure we get the necessary security documents from them and put them in our active monitoring, put them in a risk tier, et cetera. So they feel that they're confident, hey, we now have a comprehensive view of everybody that's in our environment, versus previously they might say, we have to live with the fact that there's a percentage that we just don't know that we're being used. Right now, they're much more confident than everybody that's being kind of in our walled garden. They know who's in the garden.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it, for sure. A good analogy there. I'm gonna switch things up a little bit here. We'll get back to Kevin in a minute, but there is an audience question I wanted to ask of Matt, and the question comes from Julian, who says, Matt, what makes your product better than your competitors? For what I understand, much of the intake and orchestration tools have very similar capabilities. So why should someone choose Tonkean over them?
It's a great question, and let's see. So there's a lot of compelling players in the category. I will point to a handful of things, and I'll avoid making direct comparisons to any particular competitors. But I would point to the sophistication of Tonkean's orchestration engine. Right, enterprise scale operations are complex. No two organizations look the same. And Tonkean really has an unrivaled ability to customize and tailor workflows and orchestrations for complexity. And then, of course, the 200 plus pre-built integrations, native integrations that can be customized to a level that you won't see elsewhere. I would point to the experience emphasis, right? One example, how we integrate AI into processes. Everybody has a chat bot at the front of the intake now, right? I mean, that is table stakes, right? But not everyone has inline AI support that follows requesters through the intake process, as Kevin showed you in his demo, can help out in the moment, in context, understands the fields that you're working on, understands your policies, can integrate that all together, and with a built-in handoff to human support, right? And AI innovation just beyond the intake experiences, right? What Tonkean is doing with agentic orchestration is groundbreaking, generally for operations and for AI beyond procurement. And you'll be hearing a lot more about that. Big picture, though, I would from a strategic level, cite, Tonkean has a disposition toward wrapping around your existing tools rather than replacing them, right? We do not sell a procure to pay platform. We will not try to upsell you into our own procure to pay platform. Our emphasis is on enterprise and the larger end of mid-market. Procurement teams in these segments love their power tools. That might be Coupa, it might be SAP Ariba or Microsoft or Oracle or whatever it might be. We focus on helping them make those tools play nicely with the rest of their tech stack and helping that long tail of users, right? The requesters, the stakeholders, the partners, get that abstracted experience that improves adoption. As such, we have great relationships with these big enterprise platforms and partnerships there as well. Because again, I mean, our aspiration is to be that experience and orchestration layer on top of your enterprise ready power tools, as opposed to sort of a creeping expansion into their particular functional territory.
Nikhil, if I can just add quickly to that, and I'm not getting, not getting any, I'm not on the Tonkean side, so I'm not getting anything out of this. But I think one of the huge components for us when we were selecting a tool, and obviously ultimately selected Tonkean, was a lot of what we got when we would explain our different use cases or different kind of scenarios was, here's how you could adjust your instance with this tool, or here's how you could build this out or adjust this. Whereas Tonkean was very much like, here's how we can use our system to meet you where you are, not necessarily asking us to change how we operated, but obviously configuring the solution to meet how we operate, right? And I think for us, that was a huge component of, we want a partner that's going to, question and challenge what we're doing, because we always want to make sure our process is efficient. But ultimately, there might be things that don't make sense for us to do because of how our company is structured or operates, that others were asking us to change. And Tonkean said, no, we don't have to do that. We can adjust our system to make you meet where you are. So that was a huge, huge benefit for us of why we ultimately went with Tonkean.
Yeah, it was a good question and good answers. I mean, I think, I don't have much to add, but I think just from the sort of, impartial analyst layer that I can add, there definitely is a lot on the market. I understand why, as a buyer, you might say, hey, a lot of these tools look very similar, because visually they might, and they all offer, intake and orchestration. But there are differences. And I think you guys did a good job of pointing some of those out. Like the AI and agentic fronts definitely are where I see Tonkean as being a bit more of a differentiator than other providers. So yeah, good question. Happy that was asked. So just going back to Kevin then, one thing you talked about both during our case study and today is scalability, and how that was an important consideration for you when you made your selection. So my question for you basically is, why is that? And how do you envision the future of Tonkean scaling with Cockroach?
Yeah, I mean, I think I touched on it during the demo, or maybe even prior to that. But Matt mentioned 250, whatever the number was of integrations. I think anybody who thinks that their tech stack today will be the same in 6, 12, 18, 24 months, whatever it might be, that's great. But beyond that, things are going to change. And I think for us, finding a solution that could plug into more mature systems and tools, but also going the complete opposite end, plugging into, maybe we maintain a Google Doc that or Google Sheet that maintains a approval matrix or whatever it is, it can go both from an ultra elementary, kind of data source all the way up to really sophisticated, source to pay, CLMs, whatever it might be, your ERP. The ability to then just bring other data sources in, as we look at building out other workflows, maybe I need to bring in my HRIS, right? Because I need other employee, whatever it is, it allows me to scale and build out other processes and not be limited to just you need to buy a piece of software. We're going to tie into the 5 different things that, we view as kind of standard items that you're going to be part of your buying process there. So it's a very, very open environment of what data sources or tools and systems you can build out to. And, there's been a couple, that I've brought up that we would potentially want to do in the future. And the Tonkean team's like, yep, we can gladly help you build that out, if that's an important critical workflow for y'all.
Yeah. I mean, we talked before. I think all of us actually have talked at different points today about the importance of integrations. And it seems like that answer also touches on that, because if you're going to scale by nature, you're going to have more tools, and it's important to have software that supports, integrating with those tools. So that makes plenty of sense. Yeah.
And from obviously speaking from past lives, when you're at bigger organizations that might be enterprise size, some of the legacy systems that don't play nicely with other tools and systems, right? The fact that Tonkean can pull into there, maybe users just don't have access because of data restrictions or whatever it might be, or just the general interface of the tool. The fact that you can get that information back to that legacy system and have those different departments obviously operate within it, because maybe it's not possible to move off that system, right? We're in an environment which is exciting, that we're obviously growing and scaling and bringing in new tools and systems. There's the other end where you're a large, huge organization that moving off your ERP is just not possible at this time, and you're probably not going to do it anytime in the near future. But Tonkean allows you to get to that point and obviously pull that information that you need or push that information.
And I would draw attention to a sort of tangential use case there, Kevin. If you're a big company going through M&A, right, and the company you acquired has its own ERP, its own P2P, at some point, maybe you're going to migrate or transition or integrate into one instance, right? But in the meantime, which could be years, having a unified experience layer over top of it, such that you can have consistent processes and consistent experiences, is really powerful as well.
For sure. Yeah. It looks like we have just about exactly 1 minute left. So just want to make sure I'm respectful of everyone's time and the audience, of course. I do want to remind that the ebook that we did, all of us did together, is available again. And yeah, there we go. There's the slide for it. So you can find that, of course, on Tonkean's website. And like I said, it's based off of this webinar, but we go, a bit deeper in some areas, of course, just by nature of how ebooks are. And it's I just leafed through it this morning. It's very, looks very, very appealing, and a lot of interesting insights in there that expand on what we talked about here today even. So again, very grateful for all of you for joining. And Matt, I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to add, but I just wanted to say thanks, of course, and thanks to all of you for this discussion.
Yeah, I want to thank you, Nikhil, and you, Kevin. I think it was a great discussion. Appreciate our audience for showing up, asking questions, and looking forward to seeing you all next time.
Thanks, everyone.